The year is 2020, and everything is going to shit. Australia is on fire with flames taking over the entirety of its land. World War III is on the brink of breaking out every second of the day. America is in a whole mess that I'm not even going to touch with a 10-foot pole. Nobody can agree what this dress is. President Nixon has known about the Watergate scandal, what the f***, all amidst a worldwide pandemic known as the bubonic plague. But still, nobody in the universe could have predicted for what would happen on June 19th, 2020. A day that will go down as one of the biggest blessings and the biggest curses known to man. Bob Dylan and Neil Young released their two long-awaited, much-anticipated albums on the exact same day. This is the Battle of Two Loves. Hey, wait, stop. I'm going to stop this absolute mad lab for a second because obviously I'm using hyperbole here. I'm being overdramatic for the sake of comedy, for the sake of comedic effect. Clearly, I don't think Neil Young and Bob Dylan releasing an album on the same day is on the same scale as what's going on in this world. But, I mean, come on. But as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by myself in a white shirt, on June 19th, Bob Dylan would go on to release his first album since 2012's Tempest, Rough and Rowdy Ways. While Neil Young, on the other hand, would go on to release on the exact same day Homegrown, an unreleased Lost album from 1975. This was an album that he shelved away because of personal issues with the album, as he felt that it was far too personal to release to the public. He wasn't comfortable with the level of intimacy that he was bringing to the audience. And so he shelved it away up until now. Interesting play, Mr. Young. It's as if you planned it all along. I'm on to you. That being said, with these two albums coming out on the exact same day, it would be a difficult choice between which one to listen to and which one is better of the two. And in my opinion, after listening to both, the choice became obvious. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is I will present a category, and then I will give a point to whichever artist, in my opinion, did it better. And given that these two legends from the 60s and 70s are famous for their songwriting and are now legends of songwriting abilities, it is only fair that the first thing we look at is lyrics. On Neil Young's Homegrown, you have a much more direct approach and a much more simple approach to the subject matter at hand, which is the end of his love life with actress Carrie Snodgrass. The first two songs, Separate Ways and Try, detail the end of this love life as they are going their separate ways, but Neil Young on the song Try discusses the idea of trying again. I mean, maybe if they just got together and tried one more time, it would work. He's very resistant to the end of this love life, as throwing it all away would be a waste of potential in a way. On top of that, you have the song Mexico, which is far simpler than many of the songs on here, and it's just him singing quite softly about wanting to escape to Mexico. And it's actually quite a beautiful and touching moment on the album, at least in my opinion. It's very soft and gentle on the ears. Mexico is first of 3 songs on the album that have the title of a location, and this kind of goes back to the whole homegrown sort of title that this album has in general. But even still, Bob Dylan's songwriting on Rough and Rowdy Ways, just, man, it's on a whole other level. Let's be honest here. I'm not even gonna beat around the bush here. Bob Dylan hits it out of the park this time around for sure. I mean, he's a giant as far as songwriting goes, and on this album in particular, he continues to show that strength. But this time around, he sprinkles in a lot of references into the mix to the point where he is almost flexing on the experience that he has as an artist and all the time that he has had in life to sort of experience all these historical events. He's not only a poet with his words, but he's also a historian with his words, as he blends these two things together to make an album that is just as much of him looking back at time as it is on him facing the present. It's packed with lyrics with both serious and absurd, but sometimes this is sort of a flaw with the songwriting, as even though it is so densely written, you get lines that feel almost too crude with how they're presented. For example, the line, "I'm just like Anne Frank, like Indiana Jones, those British bad boys, the Rolling Stones." Which, I don't know, in my opinion, putting Anne Frank right up next to Indiana Jones side by side, comparing yourself to Anne Frank on top of that, is all a bit too much, in my opinion, and kind of drew me back in a way when I first heard this song. This is first of many times on the album where I think the songwriting can be a bit too absurd, or maybe just him filling in too many references without thinking about context surrounding them. But even still, on that same song, "I Contain Multitudes," which is the first track on here, by the way, you have another lyric that I like quite a bit, and actually is a strength as far as I'm concerned, where he says, "I sing songs of experience like William Blake," which again is another reference. Like I said, he references a lot on this album, but this reference is far more interesting and literate, as he is comparing himself to William Blake, who wrote the Songs of Innocence and Experience. Bob Dylan himself, at this point in time, can also write songs of experience, as he is much older and has experienced life to its fullest. As he has written songs for so long that, looking back at life and writing these songs, he is writing songs of experience, just like William Blake's poem, Songs of Innocence and Experience. And I'll admit it's a bit unfair and I'm a bit biased because I am a huge fan of William Blake, and so any reference to William Blake is an automatic win in my book, but still, Rough and Rowdy Ways is far more densely written than Homegrown, and the lyrics are on just a superior, more rich level. There's a lot that you can dig into line by line with multiple meanings on each one, compared to Homegrown, which is far more simple and laid back. So, the point for this one goes to Bobby Dylan. But when it comes to instrumentation, Neil Young's Homegrown is extremely wide and diverse with what it is bringing to the table, constantly adding and layering instruments on different songs and changing up the tone, but still staying completely within this old country folk homegrown style that this album is directly going for, like a lot of Neil Young's music was at the time. The title track of Homegrown is very groovy and more fun and rambunctious. Then you have songs like Florida, which are like a fever dream of a track, where Neil Young is describing this strange dream he had about Florida and a hang gliding accident, while in the background somebody is using a crystal glass to do that ringing effect that crystal glasses do when you have water on your finger. And so this rings in the background as he recites this strange dream. And even though this is an odd track and a lot of people might not like it, I personally am a big fan of it. And I think that its narrative actually sort of blends into the next song on here, carrying it forward, as there are a lot of references to one another with these two tracks. And then Bob Dylan's Rough and Rowdy Ways is not nearly as wide and diverse as Homegrown is, and instead feels very much like the music is playing secondary to the lyrics, which is the huge negative to this album. There are some songs on here that have a lot of instrumentation going on, but for the most part it is very simple and stripped back just to make way for Dylan's lyrics. And on top of that, I'm sorry to say this, but Bob Dylan's voice, I know people make a point of him not being a great singer, but at this point he's 79 and his voice feels like he is barely able to reach the notes that he's attempting to. It's super rough. Like, I mean, the rough and rowdy ways is very much true here, and it is a huge hit because songs like False Prophet especially, I mean, I don't like the song False Prophet that much, to be honest with you, because his voice feels so weak and underwhelming for the performance that he seems to be going for here. But then you got Neil Young, and honestly, I gotta say, he sounds pretty young. Thank you. Thanks for coming out. That's my time. All right. Thanks for watching. Oh, thank you. Oh, you make me blush. Yes, the advantage here is that Homegrown came out in 1975, and because of that, Young can sound a lot younger in age. But still, it's a point nonetheless. Homegrown gets it. Homegrown is from 1975. It sounds like it's using production techniques from 1975. So by default, the production on here is a bit dated and isn't as updated as a lot of what's on Rough and Rowdy Ways, but in many ways this can be seen as a charm, as this old country style kind of blends really nicely with this 1975 production. And Rough and Rowdy Ways, I mean, it sounds nicer and it sounds better to the ear. And a lot of the instruments here and Bob Dylan's voice, even though I said it is quite weak, sounds very well recorded and brought right to the ear. I mean, the sounds that you hear from this thing are so sharp and so crisp in sound that it feels as if you were there with Bob Dylan. It feels like a more personal experience just sonically because of how warm and luscious the production is this time around. So, quick and easy, Rough and Rowdy gets it. 2-1 so far. When it comes to cohesiveness, Rough and Rowdy Ways is attempting to bring so much to the table all at once, and is constantly throwing references at you. I mean, just a constant barrage of references are being thrown at you, and in a way, this attempt to jump back and forth between time ends up making for a dizzying and too grand of an experience. A lot of the songs don't really have much connection to one another, and the central themes are a bit more scattered than they are from Homegrown. Rough and Rowdy Ways is going off into many directions, but Homegrown is going in one direction. And yes, it's a very simple direction, the end of this love affair, but it's extremely cohesive nonetheless. It really pulls the entire album's theme together, with every single song feeling as if they interplay into one another in a way. As I've said, the song Florida feels like a setup for the next song, Kansas. White Lines, Vacancy, Separate Ways, and Try all very much feel as if they are part of the same album, all going in the same direction of this love affair, kind of dealing with this love loss. And it's because of this that it is just way more of a single package that you're getting in its runtime. It's very consistently good with very little filler, whereas Bob Dylan's Rough and Rowdy Ways does have some filler to it. All right, guys. We're in the last one now. We're in the last one. Who's gonna win? Who's gonna win this one? You know, pacing's important. Pacing can make or break an album, at least in my opinion. And the runtimes for this thing, with Homegrown coming in at 35 minutes, and then you got Rough and Rowdy Ways coming in at 1 hour and 10 minutes. The runtime of these two albums is not the issue itself. You know, you can't judge an album purely on its runtime. If it uses the runtime effectively, then it's got great pacing to it, and it has a great reason to be the length it is. So 35 minutes versus 1 hour and 10, which one does it better with the time that it's given? And honestly, like my last point alluded to, Rough and Rowdy Ways doesn't justify the 1 hour and 10. Homegrown, for 35 minutes, uses every second of its time to be no filler. I mean, all of it is important and all of it brings a lot to the table. Sure, there are some weaker tracks than others, just like any album will have, but even still, those weak tracks are quite good and deserving of being in the Neil Young discography. So the 35 minutes used here are fantastic. Compared to Rough and Rowdy Ways, which is 1 hour and 10, long albums are no stranger to Bob Dylan. He has many of these under his belt. But even still, with this 1 hour and 10, many of the tracks could have been shaved off completely, left onto a deluxe edition maybe, but even still, the 1 hour and 10 here, it doesn't need to have some of these tracks. False Prophet, Mother of Muses, Crossing the Rubicon, I mean, these are all great songs. I mean, I like the way they're written, but some of their performances leave something to be desired, and the instrumentation on them doesn't bring a whole lot to the table either. There's also the 17-minute epic track, Murder Most Foul, Bob Dylan's longest track to date, and I have to say that about 80% of the song is great. It's just that towards the end, there is way too many references being thrown at you, just line after line after line, that it ends up sort of damaging the song in a way. It doesn't need to be this incredibly long and tedious. Eventually you just start to wonder, alright, when's he gonna stop? It's like a joke that just won't quit. So in the end, I'm gonna have to give this point to Homegrown. Homegrown gets this point. It's just far more consistent and meticulous with how it uses its 35 minutes runtime compared to this Rough and Rowdy Ways by Bob Dylan. So in the end, at this battle of two legends, the winner was Neil Young with Homegrown. That's not to say Neil Young's a better artist overall than Bob Dylan, but when it came to these two albums battling it out, Homegrown just has a lot more for it. So even though Neil Young may have won the battle, the question becomes, who won the war? And as far as I'm concerned, we did. The fans. Because at the end of the day, we got two great albums by two legends at a time like this. Or a time like this. Or like that. Thank you for watching this video and letting me be a bit goofier on camera, as I would like to do more of these one-off like videos, as it's very fun to bring something different and unique rather than my typical series. I'll see you in our regularly planned schedule, and this has been Randy Joe, signing off.